de Dados sobre Economia da Experiência do Mastercard Economics Institute, damos as boas-vindas a Natalia Lechmanova.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to those of you who are staying. I hope to share with you some exciting facts about the economy, about the experience economy in particular, which is what I'm here to talk to you about, and about some implications for the travel sector that hopefully you can take away with you. For those of you who don't know Mastercard Economics Institute, let me just introduce it for a minute just so you know where I'm coming from. We are a group of economists and data scientists who look at the economy through the lens of the consumer. And the way we do that is that we combine the publicly available data on the economy with Mastercard's own aggregated and anonymized spend data to have that more nuanced view of the consumer. And then we have a lot of fun with this data. So for example, here in front of you on the cover, we looked at how the patterns of spend across different categories have changed since the pandemic. And what you can see here are the blue bars, which indicate spending during the week that splits into Monday to Thursday, the blue color, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the weekend, the red color. And as you can see, for groceries, for hair and beauty, and for physical fitness, here in the example of Italy, but it really is a pan-European trend, we see that a lot of the weekend errands doing and spending has shifted from the weekend into earlier in the week. So people are now shifted some of the big shops they used to do on weekends because they were busy going to the office every day, doing it during the week. Same for going to the hairdresser, same for going to the gym. So we were wondering, okay, then what happens on the weekend if people no longer have to do all these things that they have to do that they get to do during the week? And we saw that what happened was that for restaurants, which is our proxy for the experience sector, the spending has shifted the other way. People go to restaurants relatively less relative to the pandemic during the week because they don't go to the office as much, and they go at the weekend because they have saved all this time getting haircuts and going to groceries and going to the gym at the weekend to just really enjoying and having fun. Now we'll dig deeper into this theme of experience economy and how pandemic has really shifted the way we think about spending our money and what it means for travel in particular. But before I do, because I'm an economist and we are in the middle of January, I have to share with you our outlook for 2025 in terms of the wider economy. It will help us frame the discussion, it will help us put some of these more micro trends into a useful context. So what you have in front of you is obviously a map of Eurozone, and the different colors indicate the performance of the country since the pandemic. If it's red, it means those unfortunate countries like Finland over there and Estonia have yet to recover to pre-pandemic levels. But then you have some other markets there, and you can see those in deeper blue, which are really mostly in Southern Europe. Portugal, Spain, even Italy, Greece, flashing green, not to mention Croatia, really flashing green as opposed to just blue. But a common theme that emerges is that since the pandemic, we have seen a greater economic growth in countries in Southern Europe. It's quite a reversal of fortunes from the decade previously. And that growth has, in large part, been driven by the recovery in the tourism sector. But it's not all tourism sector. And we will get to that, and we'll get to the role that consumers have played in that recovery as well. So as we look into 2025, I can tell you now, we still expect Southern European economies to outperform their Northern European peers for several reasons. We have some wider themes that will dominate the region. One is that a lot of the governments have to tighten spending because they're facing high levels of debt. So this busy-looking grid over here shows you countries in this quadrant over here that have both high debt and high deficits, who are in trouble with the European Commission, namely here Italy and Spain, the two biggest offenders, who have to cut spending and bring budget in line with European rules. Then you have countries like Portugal and Greece now that still have relatively high levels of debt, but fiscally, in terms of deficit and fiscal discipline, they're outperforming. Let me pull up here. Portugal, look, pretty much the only country here with fiscal surplus. So that fiscal drag, again, that is going to weigh on growth in a lot of the European countries is not really going to weigh on growth in Portugal. The other thing, the other challenge that we're facing is, of course, the threat of tariffs on European exports to the US that the incoming Trump administration has threatened. Now, the way to think about it is to think of a country's vulnerability to these tariffs. And ultimately, what matters is the impact in the last column here, which is the impact of exports to the US on GDP, on the whole economy. And as you can see here, Portugal is doing relatively well. Only 2% of the economy is exposed to these tariffs compared to countries like Ireland, where that figure is 12%, or countries like Germany, where it's double, 4%. Of course, some sectors, particularly goods sector that's focused on the US, which is about 7% of the export sector in Portugal, will suffer potential pain of these. Again, we don't know what these tariffs will be. We don't know if they'll be universal, only targeted, how big. We'll keep you posted. But that side of the economy is at risk. The good news, the tailwinds for this year's outlook have to do with relatively benign inflation outlook. In a lot of European countries, at least when it comes to headline inflation, we have returned to what's shown in green, which is the Central European target, and if we're not on target, we're pretty close to it. Now that inflation has come down so much, and it is around 2%, you do expect some fluctuation around these lower levels. So as a result of that, and this is important for Portugal, given that a lot of households have mortgages, and a lot of these mortgages are at variable rates, is that interest rates are coming down to unwind some of that very significant tightening that we had experienced as a result of high inflation. And as you can see on this chart here, this shows the curve of interest rates. They have already started to come down in the middle of last year, and we expect them to decline from 3% at the moment to a terminal rate of 1.75 by July this summer. And so this is really a significant tailwind for both consumption and for investment. And I'll dig deeper into how low interest rates translate into consumer spending, apart from, of course, easing that a lot of households will experience on their mortgages. Let me start with a summary of where European consumers are in terms of fundamentals, and you can compare Portugal to some of the other countries there. And you can see a lot of green. We look at consumer fundamentals along all these different metrics: confidence, debt service ratio, which has to do with how much household debt you have, employment, income, and wealth. You can see that consumer confidence is quite weak in France and Germany. I mentioned this divergence in performance between Southern European economies and Northern European economies, and really we can talk about it in the old speak as the outperformance of the periphery versus the core, because France is kind of on the verge between North and the South, but obviously is going through a very difficult economic time, and that's reflected in consumer confidence. Wealth level is down for France in particular because the housing market has corrected a lot more than in lots of other countries. But you can see Italy, Portugal, Spain benefiting from very strong consumer fundamentals because labor markets are healthy. Unemployment rates continue to go down. The orange dot in the middle shows the historical unemployment rate in all of these various Eurozone countries, European countries, and then the blue and the purple dot show last year at the latest. And so you can see we're still either unemployment rates are declining or they're kind of stuck at these very low levels. So for Portugal, we are at historically low unemployment levels. We see still a growing employment, so jobs are still being generated, and even growing labor force participation rate, which means people are joining labor force, a lot of it on the back of higher immigration. But what's interesting is that despite higher immigration, unemployment rate has been able to go down because jobs are being created. Now, Another thing about this labor market is that wage growth is quite strong, especially now relative to inflation. So again, here you see example of Portugal. Wage growth is at over 6% relative to inflation rate of about 3%. That difference between wage growth and inflation, we call it growth in real disposable incomes. It's quite a mouthful, but it basically means increase in purchasing power. This is relative to last year. These are year-on-year changes. But in a lot of southern European countries, we're beginning to see that the purchasing power has now recovered to even pre-pandemic levels or the pre-inflation period levels, which is not the case in countries like Germany, for example, and in other countries where growth has been weaker. So low unemployment, strong wage growth, really supportive of consumer fundamentals. The problem has been why growth this year, despite this outperformance of wages versus inflation and strong unemployment and low unemployment rate, we have seen growth not be as strong as we would have expected, is because consumers are using a lot of that extra purchasing power to save. Orange dot there, again, is showing historical savings rate as a share of people's disposable incomes, what they earn every month. How much they put in a bank. And you can see that for pretty much all of these countries, including Portugal, those rates are now significantly higher. The white dot is the latest figure. We also have the peak since 2022 in this latest period since interest rates have gone up. And you can see that in Portugal, you can see it. And that's because we are at the peak. The peak is the same as the latest data point. So we're thinking that as interest rates come down, people are going to unwind some of this excessive saving behavior and savings will normalize, which is important because if you don't save your money, you spend them. There's only two things you can do with your money. And so we do think that some of that normalization of the savings behavior is going to be further supportive of consumer spending this year. Now let's go to experiences. In this chart, I show our Spending Pulse data, which is our in-house measure of nationwide retail sales, and I show it for 2023 because this is where I want to start, the post-pandemic period. We have it available for various European countries. Portugal is not yet there. One day we'll get there, but you can see that the story is quite consistent across all the various countries, so it is a similar story in Portugal. And you can see that when we bucket the spend into essentials, experiences, and then things, there's quite a different performance. In 2023, when inflation was high, you see quite strong spending on groceries, on essentials, food prices were much higher. Then you see very healthy spending on lodging and restaurants, on experiences. With the recovery in travel, those sectors have done exceptionally well. You see decent performance for apparel and jewelry because these two are very connected to these two, to experiences. So smaller things have done relatively well because they're connected to experience economy. But the big bulky things, electronics, furniture, home improvement, pretty poor performance since the pandemic. Now, this has been maintained into 2024. So I show you the same data for the whole year in 2024. And it's a similar story. Of course, there's a moderation. We now have much lower inflation rates than we did in 2023. But you still see the dominance of the experiential sector even in 2024. Still relatively decent performance, though more variation across countries for apparel and jewelry, and still quite a lagging behind of durable goods as high interest rates have further delayed recovery in the housing market, although a lot of this is really due to the pandemic and the fact that we bought all the home improvement and furniture and electronics in 2020 or 2021 when we couldn't travel and we didn't know what else to spend money on. So as we look into 2025, we do expect the experiential sector to continue to do well, and I'm going to hope to convince you why. And although we do expect with lower interest rates for housing markets to begin to come to life and for these bigger purchases to also pick up a little bit and therefore for the spend to broaden. So there'll be some competition to the services spent from the durable sector. But then consumers' purchasing power is rising. It's not like one has to come at the expense of the other. It's really more of a broadening rather than this being that experiential spending is going to decline. One thing to keep in mind is that European consumers across the board have remained quite price sensitive. What does it mean? It means that when they're making choices, when they're buying things, in this example here in front of you, we looked at spending on apparel, so on fashion, and we bucketed it into budget categories, so budget brands, cheaper brands, and premium categories. This doesn't have to be luxury. This can be just like those upmarket, medium, expensive brands. And you can see that in most countries, the share of spend as late as in the third quarter of last year was still very tilted towards the budget options. Portugal really stands out as preferring the more premium option, probably reflecting the stronger recovery in Portugal, or maybe some cultural vanity. You can probably have more opinions on that. A little bit of a turnaround in France as well. So certainly cultural stereotypes play a role, but this is how people make choices. Now, this has also translated into spending on food. So when people have a choice between spending on groceries versus restaurants, you can see that apart from Germany, where really the economic situation is one of the most challenging in Europe, European consumers are preferring to dine out, to eat in restaurants. In Portugal, that figure is neutral. So again, even though budgets are more limited when it comes to spending on experiences, it has been prioritized. And in food, if groceries, the budget option, and restaurants are the more premium option, they're tending towards premium option. And same goes for travel. When we look at spend on travel and entertainment at home versus abroad, so staycations versus vacations abroad, again, apart from the Brits, who will never sacrifice their holiday for anything, it's a huge priority, most of the Europeans have staycationed relative to 2023. So they got that revenge travel out of the way after the pandemic, and last year they really remained hunkered down, they saved that money, and they stayed vacationing at home. Again, in countries like Portugal or Greece, this is expected. This is where everybody comes for vacation. So you would expect that people would choose to vacation at home. But you see, this is an increase from the previous year. So this happened even more than the previous year in 2023. Now, what does this all mean for the travel sector? So we know that the travel recovery has been incredible. The question is, can it be sustained? Well, growth in travel is already, spend on travel is already normalizing. It has been normalizing in 2024. We're reaching capacity constraints when it comes to hotel rooms, flights in the sky, etc. But what we did notice that because consumers are price sensitive, to travel, they're choosing to travel not just in the peak season, but they're choosing to travel in what we call the shoulder season, the adjacent months. So here we show spending on restaurants by tourists, cross-border spending in Portugal, and you can see decent growth in July, August, September, peak season, still in double digits in 2024, but really strong growth in May and June, February, March. The reason April is low is because of the Easter effects. Easter fell in March, so there was some of the shift in spending there, but you can see that growth in those earlier months is a lot stronger. So this is how the travel sector is growing despite capacity constraints. It's growing in these outside seasons relative to pre-pandemic. Other thing that's happening is that it's growing in new destinations. Of course, we are concerned about over-tourism in various destinations in Europe, but we're beginning to see that in a lot of countries here, in the Spanish example, while in 2019, 45% of the spend was in top 5 destinations in Spain. That share has shrunk to 39.4% at the expense of the next top 10 destinations growing. And not to mention, you can see that the growth doesn't quite compensate. So there's growth even in those next top 10 and next top 10 when tourists are coming to Spain, to Portugal, to Italy, exploring those new places, not just the usual suspects. Another way the travel sector is growing is by the huge popularity of live experiences. So when I was growing up, the way the music industry worked is, of course, I loved going to concerts, but it was the way artists were promoting their albums. You would still buy the album. You were buying the thing and then maybe going to the concert as a way of getting to know and having maybe a bit of an experience. Now it's completely reversed. The artists make money touring, make money from these live experiences because there's such a huge demand for those. So here's an example of UK, what we call Swift Lift. So how much has spending increased around the concert? In London, this is in the UK. She had 2 concerts in London, so it's heavily weighted in London, which means these numbers are particularly impressive because London is always packed with tourists. But it had so much higher spend on restaurants and on hotels because of the concert. And you can see when we look at just cross-border spending, so spending by tourists, those numbers were huge, 45% increase, 23% increase in hotels. So incredible increase in spending around that particular event, which of course was crazy in the UK and really across Europe. This year we have Oasis, we had also various sporting events last year like the Euros 24 and we always see a huge boost around these live sporting and cultural events and travel sector benefiting from that. So I'm coming up on the time. I will wrap up. We, from the economic perspective, expect very decent performance, especially for Portugal, together with the rest of the Southern European peers in 2025. The economy is going to respond well to these declining interest rates because so much of the economy has been exposed to higher interest rates through variable rate mortgages and debt on the commercial side, from that benign inflation outlook and from continued recovery in the tourism sector and in the experience economy more broadly, because there's still scope for growth in the adjacent months, in the new destinations when growth can still happen. With that, I will leave it with you. I hope you enjoy your lunch. It was lovely to speak to you, and thank you for your attention.